Hey book besties, welcome to my October reading wrap up. I am so excited to be sharing with you the books that I read in October because this was the biggest reading month I have ever had in my entire life, and I feel like I really stepped out of my comfort zone this month because I typically read a lot of contemporary romance, and I actually only read 2 romance books this month and the rest were like mysteries, thrillers and fantasy. So I am just excited to be sharing my thoughts with you guys. I hope you guys have had a really good October. I'm actually filming this the day before Halloween, so hopefully you guys have a good Halloween spooky season. And let's jump right into my reading stats and then we'll talk about the books that I read this month. In the month of October, I read 18 books. What? I still cannot comprehend that, which equal to 5,426 pages. My top 3 moods were mysterious, dark and tense, which makes sense because I read a lot of mysteries and thrillers this month. And my top 3 genres were thriller, mystery and young adult. Those were my stats. Let's jump right into the actual books that I read. I started off the month by reading the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. So I read Good Girl's Guide to Murder, Good Girl Bad Blood and As Good as Dead. This book series follows Pip, who is a high school student. In the first book, she is doing a final year project on a murder that happened 5 years ago in her hometown, where the police think that they know who the killer is, but she thinks that they've got it wrong. So she is trying to prove he's innocent and find out who the real killer is. This book was absolutely amazing. I flew through it. It was so fast paced and so interesting. It had me guessing the entire time, and I did not see the double plot twist coming at the end in the slightest. Absolutely adored this. This was a 5-star read for me. Then Good Girl Bad Blood is still following Pip, but this time she has started a true crime podcast and she's actually investigating an active missing persons case. This one I think is probably my favorite book in the series. I absolutely love this one. So freaking good. Also, we have romance as a subplot, and Ravi and Pip together were just freaking so cute. I absolutely love this. This was also 5 stars. But then we've got As Good as Dead. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but this was my least favorite book in the series. This book is split up into 2 parts. I really enjoyed part 1, but I didn't really like how part 2 ended up going because it took a really dark twist that I was just not expecting and felt very out of character, and I don't know, I didn't really like that personally. I also didn't like how the book ended because it kind of felt open-ended, like we didn't really get much closure. So yeah, the ending just was such a miss for me, which was really disappointing because I loved the first 2 books. But I rated this book 3 stars. The series as a whole though, I rated 5 stars because it absolutely captured my attention. It was so fast paced. I did not want to put it down and I was obsessed. Just wasn't really a huge fan of As Good as Dead. I really hope there's a 4th book though, like even if it's a novella, because I need closure. Then I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This follows a widowed actress named Casey. She is really struggling after her husband passes away. So her mum basically sends her to live at this secluded house near the lake that her and her husband used to like vacation in. And then she meets a famous couple across the lake where she kind of gets like obsessed to the point that she's like watching their house across the lake. But then she notices something is off, and then the woman across the lake goes missing and she is trying to find out what happens. I will say the first 100 pages of this book was really slow and I was kind of getting bored and I was tempted to DNF this book, but I'm so glad that I didn't DNF it because after you get past the 100 pages, it just gets so freaking good. And the plot twist towards the end, I was not expecting that at all, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was actually really cool. I rated this one 4 stars. Then of course I had to read Verity by Colleen Hoover because I had to see what all the hype was about, and I specifically saved this book for October. I actually did a reading vlog for this, so I'll have that link down below if you guys want to see my reactions and thought processes through this book because wow, this was a wild ride. So this book follows a struggling author named Lowen. She has has just recently got evicted from her apartment, and then she gets this opportunity to continue writing a series for a very well-known author named Verity, because Verity has got into a car accident which has left her completely paralyzed. So Verity's husband Jeremy gets Lowen to continue the series for her because her writing style is like very similar to Verity's. So for this, Lowen has to actually go and stay at Verity and Jeremy's house, and while Lowen is staying with them, she finds this autobiography that Verity left before she had her car accident, and it just reveals some really crazy things. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, this book was very disturbing. Honestly made me feel very uncomfortable reading throughout the whole entire thing. Like, it definitely captured my attention and I really enjoyed the writing style and the plot twist, but the book as a whole just left me feeling sick. Like, I literally wanted to throw up while I was reading Verity's autobiography because yeah, it was insane. Not my favorite Colleen Hoover book, but also not my least favorite, so I rated this one 3 stars. I would probably recommend it if you do really enjoy psychological thrillers, but just make sure you check trigger warnings because yeah, there's a lot of triggers in this. Like, this whole book is a giant trigger warning. Then I decided to pick up Coho's other thriller book, which was Layla. This one follows Leeds and Layla, who are completely and utterly happily in love until an unexpected attack happens on Layla that basically has her fighting for her life at the hospital. Once she comes back from the hospital, Layla is definitely not the same and their relationship is not the same at all. So Leeds decides to take Layla to the place where they first met to try and rekindle their relationship and just get some of Layla's memories back. But while they are at the place where they first met, Leeds actually finds that they are not alone because there is a ghost at that place named Willow who has unfinished business. But Leeds ends up getting really close to the ghost and is wanting to help her. This book wasn't my cup of tea. I didn't really like any of the characters. I wasn't super invested into the plot either. So yeah, I think I ended up rating this one 2.5 stars if I remember. Then I read the cutest little graphic novel, which was Pumpkinheads, which is by Rainbow Rowell. This is such a cozy vibe book. If you just really love autumn and Halloween, this book needs to be a go-to because oh my gosh, there were just so many fun autumnal activities. The romance was just really cute, the friendship was really cute, and I just loved the atmosphere that this book had. And the illustrations, oh my god, the illustrations in this book are absolutely stunning. Like, I love, and it's basically set at this pumpkin patch. It's so cute. I can definitely see myself rereading this every October to get those cozy Halloween feels. I gave this one 4 stars. I also read another graphic novel which was actually recommended by my friend Sarah's Reading Nook, and that is Witches in Brooklyn by Sophie Gabasi, I think that's how you say her name. This one is a middle grade graphic novel. It basically follows this girl named Effie, and she moves in with her 2 aunties who are actually witches, and Effie finds out that she's a witch as well. It was so light-hearted, it was funny. I love the 2 aunties in this book. They were hilarious, and there's actually a second book in this series as well, so I'll definitely be wanting to pick that up. But I really enjoyed this one because I feel like it was such a good light-hearted book among all the mystery thrillers that I read. I rated this one 4 stars as well. I think recently I've discovered that I actually really enjoy graphic novels, so definitely leave some recommendations down below of some graphic novels that I should check out because yeah, I really enjoyed the 2 that I read this month. I definitely do want to check out Heartstopper though, but still haven't got around to it. This next book was definitely the coziest book that I read this month, which was Kiki's Delivery Service, which is actually a Studio Ghibli movie. It is actually one of my comfort movies, so when I saw the book at the library, I knew I had to pick it up and read it. And oh my gosh, this book was just so cozy and gave me nostalgic vibes, even though this was the first time I read it. But if you don't know, Kiki's Delivery Service is about a witch in training named Kiki and her cat named Gigi. When she comes of age, she has to leave home with her cat and find a town to live in, and she ends up starting this flying delivery service at the new town that she's living in. And it's basically her adventures as a witch in training, and it is just so cute. If you have watched the movie version and if you love it, I highly recommend reading the book because it was just so cute. I give this one 4 stars. The next book I read was the first book in the Villain series by Serena Valentino. This one is Fairest of All, which is the evil queen from Snow White's backstory of why and how she became so evil. It was really interesting because you don't normally get like a villain's backstory in books and movies, so I thought this was really cool. I gave this book 3 stars. Although it was super interesting to get the backstory of the evil queen, I did feel a little bit bored throughout majority of this book, and I do feel like it was a little repetitive at times as well. But overall, it was really cool to read her backstory. Definitely recommend if you are a Disney fanatic. I'm not sure if I'll end up continuing this series. I kind of want to because I really want to get to Gothel from Rapunzel because that is my favorite Disney movie and I would love to hear her backstory, but I don't know if I have to read the books in order to get to that book. Let me know if you guys know. The next few books that I read, I don't actually have physical copies with me because I've already returned them back to the library, so I'm gonna have photos of them up on the screen so you guys can see the book covers. So I read The Ex-Hex, which is a witchy Halloween rom-com, and it gave me all the cozy small town Halloween witchy vibes that I wanted, and it was so funny. Like, I was actually like full on laughing out loud while reading this book. So this book follows a witch named Vivian. 9 years ago she went through a breakup, and her cousin actually put a hex on the ex-boyfriend, but she thought it was just a silly little ex-hex joke. But then turns out 9 years later, when her ex-boyfriend Reese has to come back to the small town for the annual fall fair and to recharge the ley lines, the hex is very much there, and there's a series of misfortunes that happen to not only Reese, the ex, but also to the whole small town in general. So Vivian and Reese, her ex-boyfriend, are stuck working together to figure out how to break this hex, and while they're doing that, you know, feelings are still there, slowly coming back up, so it's also a second chance romance. I gave this book 4 stars. It was so funny. I love the small town, I love the characters, and it was just a feel-good, funny, witchy rom-com. Definitely recommend. I feel like it is the perfect book to read in October. Then I read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and this was the scariest book I have read to this date. I don't know if it's because I read this book at night, but I was like actually scared. I was looking over my shoulder and getting scared over the tiniest little noises while reading this book, but it absolutely had me hooked to the whole thing. I basically read it in one sitting because it was so interesting. So in this book, 25 years ago, Maggie, our main character, and her family lived in this Victorian estate which was like rumored to be haunted. They only lasted like 28 days there, and then they fled in the dead of night, and her father actually recounted all of the memories in a memoir of his experience living at that house. But now that Maggie's older, she doesn't actually remember having any ghostly experiences while at the house, and when she inherits the estate 25 years later, she goes back to that house to do some home renovations before she resells it. But in order to do that, she needs to live in the house. And then there are some parallels that happen between her father's story and what's happening to her while she's living in that house. And it was scary. I was low-key terrified reading this book, but this was such an unexpected hit for me as a book. But I just feel like it gave the perfect Halloween scary vibe. And plot twist, oh my gosh, the plot twist at the end, was not expecting that at all. It had me shook. I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read another Riley Sager book because I feel like he's the king of writing thrillers. But I read Survive the Night, which I was so excited about because the concept sounded so cool. So it's basically about this main character named Charlie. She is a university student, and at her university campus, there have been some murders that have happened, and her best friend actually was one of the victims. And she is wanting to escape her university Charlie go back, stay with her grandma, but in order to do that, she needs a ride to get there. So she basically hitches a ride with this stranger, and while she's in the car, she thinks that she is in the car of the killer. And this whole book is set in the one night, and majority of it is in the car, which was really cool. But this book was an example of concept was really great, but the execution was just not it. I found myself bored. I was skimming through some of the pages, and I also hated the main character, Charlie. You know when you're watching a scary movie and the main character is just so dumb that you're just like screaming at the TV? That was me reading Survive the Night, because oh my gosh, Charlie was just such an infuriating character. She annoyed me so much. At the end of the book, I was like, I literally couldn't care less what happens to these characters because I do not like a single one of them. And yeah, I gave this one 2 stars. Definitely not my favorite Riley Sager book. Kind of disappointed, honestly. But do you know one book that I was not disappointed in? Before We Were Strangers by Renee Carlino. This was one of my only romance books that I read, and oh my god, I freaking love this book so much. I think I read this one in a day or like in one sitting because it was amazing. It is a second chance romance following Matt and Grace. They met when they were in college and they are literally soulmates. But then something happens that causes them to break up and have no communication at all until one day they see each other at the subway station. And oh my gosh, this one you get dual POV and then a now perspective, and second chance romance is very hit or miss with me, but this book was an absolute hit with the second chance romance because I love this couple so much, and I'm so happy that they had their happy ending, and I love this book so much. Oh my god, I need more people to read this book because wow, I think this book is definitely going to be on my list of like top 10 favorite books of 2022 because wow, I really love that book. I definitely need to buy my own copy because I want to annotate it, I want to reread it. It's so good. So if you need a new romance book recommendation, and if you haven't read Before We Were Strangers yet, go pick it up because it is amazing. 5 stars, absolutely. The other romance book I read was Reasons Why Not to Date Your Nemesis by Melanie Munton. This is a contemporary enemies to lovers romance set in a small town. And I feel like this was one of the only contemporary romance enemies to lovers where they were actually enemies, because I know when I read some enemies to lovers romance books, the reason why they're enemies is so small, but in this book they have legit reasons for being enemies, and they've been enemies for years, ever since they were kids. So they were basically childhood enemies to lovers, which was so interesting. So we've got Olivia and Ben. Olivia is an Airbnb host, and we've got Ben who is actually returning back to this small town after years has gone by to kind of right his wrongs, and he's also the new sheriff in town. Olivia and Ben are kind of forced to be spending a lot of time together because Ben is staying at her Airbnb. Ben and Olivia's banter was everything. The witty banter in this book is so good. I loved that so much. Honestly, one of my favorite things about the book. But I feel like if this book had a little less spice, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, because the spice in this book was like low-key cringy. And don't get me wrong, I love me a good spicy book, but I feel like there was so much potential to explore the characters' past traumas and have this book not only be a rom-com but have like a little bit more depth to the characters, because the characters have had so much history and there was so much potential to see a little bit more character growth. I feel like the book was really heavily focused on a lot of spice a lot of the time, which kind of took away from the actual book itself. Like I found myself actually skipping some of the spicy scenes, and Ben was honestly just giving me the ick a lot of the times, especially when he just kept calling Olivia woman. Like, no, can we please not? Like, that is not attractive. That is such an ick for me. No thank you. Overall though, I gave this book 3 stars because there were definitely aspects of the book that I did like, as I mentioned, but there was also just a lot of things that I was not a fan of that was just giving me the absolute ick. The next book I read was Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica, which is a mystery thriller. So this book follows a then and now perspective and also has multiple POVs. So 11 years ago, Delilah and her mother Meredith went missing, and around the same time there was another woman named Shelby who was actually a little bit of a link to Meredith because they kind of knew each other. She also went missing as well. But then 11 years later, Delilah ends up coming back, but Meredith is still nowhere to be found. And we follow a then and now perspective to kind of see what was happening around the time that Meredith went missing, who could have been the suspect, why is Delilah the only one that's come back. Unpopular opinion, but I wasn't really a fan of the plot twist. I don't know why, but I just didn't enjoy it at all. The book as a whole was interesting, but also at the same time, there were dips in this book where I was kind of like, this is boring. So I gave this one 3 stars. And the last book I read in October was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This was such an anticipated read for me because it sounded so cool. So it's basically about this wedding that is set in a secluded island, and you get multiple perspectives from different people in the bridal party. So like the wedding planner, the bride, the best man, the +1, and the bridesmaid. And there's a murder that's happened at the wedding, but you don't know who is murdered and you don't know who the murderer is, and you slowly piece together the pieces while you're reading this book from the multiple perspectives. This was definitely a very atmospheric read, and I think that's what I really liked most about this book was the atmosphere that it gave off. But I also really enjoyed the multiple POVs because it was so interesting to get the different perspectives of the bridal party. That was so cool. I don't know if it's the fact that this was the last thriller that I read this month, and I read so many thrillers this month. I wasn't as invested as I thought I was going to be for this book. Like, I really liked the atmosphere and I loved the multiple POVs, but I just felt a little bit disconnected to the book for some reason. And yeah, I don't know. I have a feeling it's just mainly due to the fact that I was just like on a binge with thriller books, and then I kind of felt a little bit burnt out when I was reading this one. But I did decide to give this one 3.5 stars though, especially because the atmosphere in this book was absolutely unreal. But like I said, while I was reading this book, I was kind of feeling a little bit burnt out. And that is all 18 books that I read in the month of October. I definitely do not normally read this many books a month. I was just clearly in the mood to read, and I can definitely feel myself going into a slump in November after the amount of books that I read this month. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this October wrap up. I have already posted my November TBR, so I'll have that link down below if you guys want to check out the books that are on my radar for November. Definitely give this video a huge thumbs up if you did enjoy watching, and comment down below what your favorite book you read this month was and what your plans are for Halloween as well. And subscribe to my channel down below because I post new videos every single week, and follow me on all my social medias. I'll have them all linked down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!